That night, when Zara picked up the wallet her husband Daniel had forgotten at home, she believed she was only being a good and attentive wife. She ordered a ride to the airport just before midnight, holding the leather wallet tightly as if it were something precious. When the car finally stopped near the terminal, she reached for the door, ready to step out and hurry inside. Suddenly, the driver locked all the doors with a sharp click that made her heart jump. "Please don't get out," the man said, his voice tense and low. Zara froze and asked softly, "Why would you say that, sir?" The driver swallowed hard and replied, "Give me 5 minutes, and you'll understand." Zara stayed frozen in the back seat, forcing herself to breathe slowly while fear crept into her chest. The driver kept glancing into the rearview mirror, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Please trust me," he said again, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound calm. Zara hugged her purse and whispered a short prayer, unsure whether to scream or remain silent. She watched the dashboard clock, counting every second as if it were an hour. The silence inside the car felt heavy and unnatural. She had no idea that those few minutes would decide whether she lived or died. 5 minutes later, flashing blue and red lights exploded around the car without warning. 3 police vehicles surrounded them, blocking every possible exit. Zara gasped, convinced for a moment that she was being arrested or worse. Armed officers rushed past the car, shouting orders into the darkness. To her shock, they did not stop at the driver's door but ran toward a shadow near the terminal wall. Within seconds, they tackled a man dressed in black and forced him to the ground. A knife and a cloth soaked with chemicals fell from his pockets. Zara felt her body go numb as she realized what had almost happened. Only then did the driver unlock the doors and finally turn to face her. "My name is Mark," he said gently, his fear replaced with calm authority. He explained that he had once been the head of security for Zara's late father. "Your father asked me to watch over you," he continued quietly. Zara stared at him in disbelief as everything began to make sense. He told her the man arrested had been hired to kidnap her the moment she stepped out of the car. "If you had opened that door," Mark said softly, "you would not be alive right now." Zara broke down, shaking as the truth settled into her bones. Still trembling, Zara followed Mark's gaze toward the glass windows of the terminal above them. There, standing under the bright lights, was her husband Daniel. He was not alone, and his face showed anger rather than relief. Beside him stood Lily, Zara's closest friend, clinging to his arm as if she belonged there. Zara felt her heart crack as she watched them argue in frustration, clearly upset that their plan had failed. In that moment, the forgotten wallet, the midnight trip, and the locked car all became painfully clear. The betrayal cut deeper than the fear she had just survived. Zara understood then that her life had just entered a war she never chose. Zara felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared while she stared at Daniel through the glass walls of the terminal. She watched him pace angrily, throwing his phone into his pocket and rubbing his face in frustration. Lily leaned closer to him, whispering something that made his jaw tighten even more. Zara could not hear their words, but she no longer needed sound to understand their meaning. Her husband was not worried about her safety, only about a plan that had gone wrong. The realization crushed the last piece of blind love she had held onto. Tears streamed down her face, but something colder began to replace the pain. That night, fear slowly transformed into clarity. Mark started the car again and slowly drove away from the terminal, leaving the flashing police lights behind them. "He doesn't know you saw him," Mark said calmly, watching Zara through the mirror. Zara wiped her tears and whispered, "He wanted me gone, didn't he?" Mark nodded without hesitation and told her the truth was even worse than she imagined. He explained that Daniel was drowning in debt from illegal gambling and had been desperate for money. "Your life insurance policy was his escape," Mark said carefully. Zara felt sick as every memory of their marriage replayed in her mind. She realized she had been living beside a stranger wearing a husband's face. When Mark asked her to check the wallet again, Zara opened it with shaking hands. Hidden between the bills was a folded plane ticket with Daniel's name and Lily's printed beside it. Beneath that ticket was a life insurance document taken out only weeks earlier. Zara read the beneficiary line and felt her chest tighten as Daniel's name stared back at her. "He planned everything," she whispered, her voice hollow. Mark nodded and said quietly, "This wasn't impulse, Zara, this was preparation." She clenched the papers tightly, no longer crying but burning with disbelief. The truth was undeniable and impossible to unsee. They arrived back at the house before Daniel could return, and the silence inside felt heavier than ever. Zara moved through the rooms like a ghost, seeing every object differently now. The couch where they once laughed felt like a stage for lies. Mark advised her to act normal and leave the wallet where Daniel might reasonably find it. "You need him to believe nothing changed," he said firmly. Zara placed the wallet between the couch cushions with careful precision. She practiced her calm expression in the mirror, forcing her face to obey her will. That night, survival depended on performance. When Daniel finally walked through the door, Zara pretended to wake up in confusion. "You're back already?" she asked softly, rubbing her eyes. Daniel froze when he saw her, clearly shocked to find her alive and calm. He quickly recovered and spun a story about traffic and realizing his wallet was missing. Zara listened quietly and then pointed toward the couch without suspicion. Daniel rushed to grab the wallet, relief flooding his face when he saw it untouched. He hugged her tightly, thanking her over and over while the smell of another woman's perfume clung to him. Zara returned the embrace, knowing the war had officially begun. That night, Zara lay beside Daniel without sleeping, staring at the ceiling while listening to his breathing. Every sound he made felt like a reminder that the man next to her had wanted her erased. She replayed his smile at the airport window again and again until it stopped hurting and started instructing her. Zara understood that fear alone would not save her anymore. She needed patience, precision, and silence. The woman who trusted without question was gone. In her place was someone alert, watching, and learning. This bed had turned into a battlefield, and she would not move first. The next morning, Daniel acted unusually gentle, preparing breakfast and asking if she felt well. Zara smiled and answered softly, hiding her disgust behind practiced calm. "You look tired," he said, studying her face too closely. "I'm fine," she replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. Inside, she counted every word he spoke and every gesture he made. Mark's warning echoed in her mind, reminding her that desperate people make dangerous mistakes. Zara decided her greatest weapon would be appearing harmless. Daniel needed to believe she was still blind. Later that day, Mark returned quietly and handed Zara a small recording device no larger than a button. "Hide this somewhere Daniel always keeps near him," he said firmly. Zara nodded, understanding the weight of what she was about to do. That night, while Daniel showered, she slipped the device into his leather briefcase, the one he carried everywhere. Her hands were steady, though her heart pounded wildly. When Daniel came out smiling, she handed him a towel and kissed his cheek. From that moment on, every lie he told would belong to her. It did not take long for Daniel to reveal himself. 2 nights later, Zara heard his voice through her phone as he spoke to Lily in secret. His tone was sharp, angry, and stripped of affection. "The plan failed," he hissed, "and I'm running out of time." Lily's voice trembled as she mentioned debts, threats, and people who were no longer patient. Zara listened in silence as the truth spilled freely. The love story she once believed in sounded like a criminal contract. When the call ended, Zara did not cry. She began planning. The following day, Zara quietly met with her father's old lawyer under the excuse of estate planning. She transferred assets, froze joint accounts, and revised her will with calm clarity. The lawyer raised an eyebrow but asked no questions beyond what was required. "If anything happens to me," Zara said evenly, "everything goes to charity." Those words felt like armor locking into place. Daniel could no longer profit from her death. The game had changed, and he didn't know it yet. That evening, Daniel returned home carrying flowers and forced concern. He handed Zara a bottle of expensive supplements and insisted she take them daily. Zara thanked him sweetly, already suspicious. When he wasn't looking, she tested the capsules and confirmed they were not vitamins. She disposed of them quietly, replacing each dose with harmless alternatives. Daniel watched her closely in the days that followed, waiting for weakness that never came. Instead, Zara grew stronger, more composed, and more distant. His frustration became visible. Sensing his unraveling, Zara made a calculated move. She suggested inviting Lily over for dinner, pretending nostalgia and forgiveness. Daniel hesitated, then agreed too quickly. The night was set like a stage, with candles, food, and polite laughter. Zara watched them exchange glances heavy with panic. She told a fictional story about a dream involving betrayal, poisoning, and an airport at night. Lily dropped her fork, and Daniel nearly choked on his drink. Zara smiled and ended the story softly, saying it was only a dream. Then Zara delivered the real blow with calm precision. She announced that she had updated her will earlier that week. "If I die suddenly," she said lightly, "everything goes to charity." Daniel froze, and Lily's face drained of color. Zara continued eating as if discussing the weather. In that moment, murder lost its value. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Zara knew she had won the psychological ground. That night, Daniel did not sleep at home. Panic drove him back to Lily, and together they argued through desperation. The recording device captured everything, from threats to plans of forced signatures. They spoke of warehouses, old properties, and hidden assets they believed Zara still controlled. What they didn't know was that every word was being saved. Zara listened to the playback calmly, confirming her final step. They were walking straight into the trap she was preparing. By morning, Zara was ready. She left the house quietly with Mark waiting nearby. Her fear was gone, replaced by resolve. Everything ahead would be dangerous, but controlled. Daniel believed he still had leverage. In truth, he was already exposed. The ending had begun, even if he could not yet see it. That same afternoon, Daniel met 3 rough men in a quiet corner of a cheap cafe on the edge of town. He spoke in a low, urgent voice, explaining that he needed Zara frightened enough to sign whatever they put in front of her. The men listened with bored expressions until he mentioned a generous payment. "She's small, right?" one of them asked, smirking. Daniel nodded and said, "You just need her to sign, not disappear, unless she refuses." He slid an envelope of cash across the table as a down payment. In his mind, this was the last throw of the dice. He believed pain would break her faster than fear. While Daniel chased shadows, Zara sat with Mark and her lawyer, finalizing the details of their plan. She shared the recordings, the forged documents, and the details of the airport incident. The lawyer listened carefully and nodded, seeing a clear pattern of attempted murder and fraud. With his help, Zara contacted a trusted police officer who owed her father a favor. They agreed to act only when they had Daniel and his helpers caught in the middle of a crime. Zara did not want just suspicion, she wanted proof. Mark promised to keep her one step ahead of Daniel's moves. Together, they prepared for the moment he would finally reveal how far he was willing to go. Just as they expected, Daniel chose the house as the place for his next move. At sunset, a van with dark windows rolled slowly up to Zara's gate while the lights inside the house stayed off. Daniel used his spare key and slipped inside with the 3 men and Lily close behind. "Find her and hold her," he ordered, his voice tight with anger and fear. The men spread out through the rooms, kicking doors open and shouting her name. Every room was perfectly neat, perfectly empty, almost like a stage waiting for actors. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized she was gone, but her car was still in the garage. Something about the silence felt wrong. Suddenly, the laptop sitting on the living room table lit up with an incoming video call. The screen turned bright, and Zara's face appeared, calm and composed, sitting in an unfamiliar room. "Good evening, Daniel," she said softly, looking straight into the camera. Lily gasped and stepped back, and the hired men glanced at each other with confusion. Zara greeted them all politely, even calling the strangers guests. Then she pointed to a small symbol on the corner of the screen and explained that hidden cameras in the house were streaming everything to a secure location. If she pressed one button on her phone, the recording would reach the police and their names would be attached to it forever. Daniel went pale, realizing this was no longer a private game. Zara spoke slowly, giving him one final chance to listen. She told him she knew about the debts, the gambling, the poison pills, and the plan at the airport. She did not raise her voice, she did not cry, she just laid out the facts like a careful list. Daniel tried to shout over her, accusing her of being dramatic, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Lily grabbed his arm and whispered that they needed money, not another speech. Zara watched them calmly and then offered a different path. She said there was liquid cash, gold, and documents stored in an old family warehouse, enough to clear his debt and walk away. Her words dangled in the air like a final test. Daniel's greed spoke louder than his caution. He demanded to know where the warehouse was and how to open the safe. Zara described the exact building in an old industrial area, the rusted gate, and the heavy machine standing over a hidden floor compartment. She gave them a code that she said would open the safe, one tied to their wedding date in reverse. The hired men looked interested for the first time, imagining stacks of cash. Lily pushed Daniel, saying this was their chance to fix everything and disappear. Zara ended the call with a steady gaze and a final warning that not all treasure was gold. Then the screen went black, leaving them alone with their decision. The van reached the warehouse district under a dim orange sky, the streets almost empty and lined with forgotten buildings. Daniel jumped out first, keys in hand, followed by Lily and the three men carrying tools. They broke the chain on the gate and pushed their way inside the dusty property. The warehouse door opened with a long, painful screech, releasing cold air that smelled of rust and old oil. Guided by Zara's description, they found the large metal machine standing like a dead giant at the back. Daniel pointed to the concrete beneath it and ordered the men to start breaking the floor. For nearly an hour, the place echoed with metal hitting stone. Sweat, curses, and greed filled the air. At last, one of the men hit something solid that did not sound like cracked cement. They cleared away the broken chunks and uncovered the top of a metal safe buried into the ground. Daniel's eyes lit up with wild hope as they dragged it out and dropped it near the center of the floor. His hands shook while he turned the dial, following the numbers Zara had given him. With a soft click, the lock released, and everyone leaned closer to see what was inside. Daniel lifted the lid, expecting money, gold, or at least something he could sell. Instead, he found folders, photos, and printed documents neatly stacked in rows. Confusion crossed his face first, then dread. On top of the stack was an envelope with his name in Zara's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, he opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The message was short and sharp, saying that the only treasure here was the truth. Inside the safe, he found copies of his gambling records, illegal transfers, and photos of him with Lily entering hotels and leaving together. There were also copies of the life insurance policy and forged paperwork tied to Zara's properties. Lily began to panic, saying they needed to burn everything and run. One of the men cursed loudly, realizing this job was a trap. Before Daniel could speak, bright white light flooded the windows, and sirens filled the night. Police cars surrounded the warehouse with loud orders blaring through speakers, telling everyone inside to lie on the floor and not move. The hired men dropped their tools and raised their hands, suddenly much less brave. Daniel stood frozen, holding the papers that proved everything he had done. Lily grabbed his arm, sobbing that she did not want to go to prison, but he could barely hear her through the noise. Armed officers stormed in, forcing them to the ground and snapping cold handcuffs around their wrists. As they were dragged to their feet, the door opened again, and Zara stepped inside with Mark at her side, watching quietly. The trap had closed, and there was no space left for lies. Daniel lifted his head as Zara and Mark walked into the warehouse, the bright police lights turning her into a clear silhouette against the chaos. For a second, he almost expected her to rush to his side and forgive him like before. Instead, she stopped a few steps away and simply looked at him, her eyes calm but distant. "Do you remember the night at the airport?" she asked softly, loud enough for him and Lily to hear. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Zara did not wait for his excuses and said, "That was the night my love for you died, Daniel." Lily sobbed on the floor, but Zara did not look at her. The officers around them listened in silence, seeing clearly who was the victim and who were the traitors. A senior officer stepped closer and asked Zara if she wanted to say anything else before they took the prisoners away. She nodded and told him that every step Daniel and Lily had taken that night was already recorded and backed up. She explained that there were audio files, video clips, and documents that matched perfectly with what they had just found in the safe. The officer thanked her for her courage and signaled to his team. Daniel shouted her name, promising to change, swearing he had been confused and pressured. Zara did not respond. She simply turned her back as they led him and Lily away in handcuffs. In that moment, she understood that walking away was not weakness but strength. The warehouse felt cold and empty once the police cars drove off, but inside her, something finally felt clear. That night, Mark drove Zara home in silence, giving her space to breathe after everything that had happened. The house looked different now, not because it had changed, but because she no longer saw it through the eyes of a trusting wife. She walked through each room, touching the furniture and walls like someone checking which parts of a body were still alive. The bedroom where Daniel had slept felt like a costume room that no longer belonged to her story. "We will change this place," Mark said gently, standing in the doorway. Zara nodded and replied, "Yes, it needs to become mine, not ours." For the first time in a long time, she slept alone, and the silence in the house felt like a new beginning instead of a threat. In the weeks that followed, Zara began to rebuild her life piece by piece. She called painters, movers, and designers, changing colors, curtains, and even the position of the furniture. Slowly, the house lost the shadow of Daniel's choices and took on the warmth of her own taste. At the same time, she met daily with her lawyers to sort through contracts, debts, and forged signatures. Mark attended every meeting, making sure nothing slipped past them. Together, they closed accounts Daniel had opened in secret and protected every asset her father had left her. The work was exhausting, but each signed document felt like another door closing on Daniel's control. Zara discovered she was stronger with every step she took. Soon, the legal process moved from investigation to court. Zara had to sit in the witness stand and tell her story in front of strangers, lawyers, and a serious-faced judge. She spoke clearly about the airport, the poison pills, the fake work trip, and the warehouse trap. The recordings of Daniel and Lily's conversations played across the courtroom, filling the air with their own words. The photos from the safe and the evidence of forged documents completed the picture. Daniel could not hide behind charm or lies anymore. His face grew thinner every day of the trial. Lily kept her head down, knowing every eye in the room now saw her as a willing partner. The truth, once hidden, stood in the middle of the room where no one could ignore it. When the verdict finally came, the judge's voice was steady and cold. Daniel was sentenced to many years in prison for attempted murder, fraud, and forgery. Lily received a slightly lighter sentence but was still facing a long time behind bars for her part in the plan. Zara listened without smiling, without clapping, and without celebrating. Justice did not erase the pain, but it protected her future. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but she only said, "The law has spoken," and walked away. That night, she stood in her quiet kitchen, holding a cup of tea, and realized she was no longer afraid of being alone. Her life belonged to her again. Prison changed Daniel in ways he had never imagined when he first started gambling. Behind those walls, there were no fancy suits, expensive perfumes, or charming smiles to protect him. Some inmates knew about his debts and the people he had failed to pay. Threats followed him from cell to cell, turning every day into a nervous wait. Lily also learned what it meant to lose freedom for a choice she had willingly made. The woman who once walked proudly into restaurants now shared a crowded room with strangers who did not respect her. Both of them had traded a loyal friend and a stable life for greed. Their punishment was not only the time they had to serve, but the heavy knowledge of what they had thrown away. While they sank into regret, Zara chose growth instead of bitterness. She took full control of her father's company, working closely with honest advisors and new managers. At first, some people doubted her, thinking she was only the owner's daughter, but her decision soon proved otherwise. She uncovered small corrupt practices and removed those who had helped Daniel in secret deals. She set new rules based on transparency and respect, and slowly the company's reputation improved. Invitations began to arrive for her to speak at events about leadership and resilience. Each time she shared her story, she focused not on revenge, but on courage and clear thinking. People started seeing her not as a victim, but as an example of quiet strength. Months later, Zara returned to the same airport where everything had almost ended. This time she arrived with a small suitcase, a light coat, and peaceful eyes. Mark walked beside her, carrying nothing but his phone and the careful watchfulness he never abandoned. They paused near a familiar concrete column, the place where her life had been balanced between death and survival. "Do you want to leave?" Mark asked gently, ready to move if the memory hurt too much. Zara shook her head and smiled softly. "No," she answered, "I want to remember that I walked away from here alive and awake." Then she thanked him quietly for being the guardian her father had trusted. Together they headed toward the departure hall. Zara's flight that day was not a trip to escape her past, but a journey to celebrate her new beginning. She had chosen a mix of spiritual travel and simple rest, places she had always wanted to see but once imagined visiting only as someone's wife. Now she went as herself, complete and unafraid. As she stood in line at the gate, she thought about the night in the locked car and the voice that had said, "Please trust me for 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes had revealed a betrayal, saved her life, and pushed her into her true strength. The woman who boarded the plane was no longer the gentle blind believer she had once been. She was a woman who had faced death, uncovered lies, and rebuilt her world with her own hands. Somewhere far behind her, Daniel and Lily lived with the walls they had built around themselves, while Zara finally walked toward open skies.